Hello, I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody. The sources that I consulted for this episode are law.justia.com, newspapers.com, and casetext.com. Our music is written and performed by Isaiah Hildreth. While the information in this episode is factual, the narrative at the beginning, told by Curtis Hildreth, is fictional, but based on my memories of living in Liberty at the time of these murders. You're listening to
Hard Times and True Crimes.
There's something about that small town America that takes us back to the days past when things just seemed simpler. You know what I mean, where everybody knows everybody, and if you do something stupid, the busy bees start buzzing, and well, your mama knows about it long before you ever get home. Welcome to Liberty, North Carolina, the quintessential small town, but not just a small town, a southern small town, where even the name permeates that down south American feeling. It's 1976, and Watergate is in our rearview mirror. The 76 election is just ahead in 7 short months. But for now, life goes on as usual. Easter's coming up in a couple of weeks, and all the kids are waiting for that big event, the egg hunt over in Julian at Gilmore Cemetery. And I know what you're thinking, and it does seem odd to have an egg hunt in a cemetery. But you know, one thing that makes all small towns alike are their eccentric little quirks, which also make them all different. And for us, it's an annual egg hunt in a graveyard. And if we're lucky, the folks over at Lake Juneau will fly their little plane over the cemetery and drop out tons of candy for the children. It really is something else. But I know why you're really here. You want to hear about the other big deal around here, the murder of 2 of the nicest people you might ever meet. But you won't hear it from me. I've got to grab some supper from Muzzy's before I take the kids over to Curtis Theater. We're going to watch the Bad News Bears. But I know a couple of ladies who can tell you all about what happened to the Foglemans. They'll give you all the facts and, if you're lucky, a little small town gossip too.
Sometime during the night, between Saturday, April 3rd, and Sunday, April 4th, 2 people were murdered in their home. And this shook the whole town, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Liberty was not just the kind of town that this sort of thing happened in. Right. On Sunday, April 4th, 65-year-old DeLacy Fogleman and his wife, Ethel, age 60, didn't show up for church.
Okay.
Now this
got a bad feeling.
Right, yeah. Now this was strange because DeLacy was a deacon and Ethel was a Sunday school teacher, and they were both very active members at Macedonia Baptist Church. But this was way before you could just check in on somebody with a quick text or a call on your cell phone. So after church, 84-year-old M.E. Bryant, who was Ethel's father, he decided to stop by the Fogleman's house and check on them. And what he found couldn't have been more shocking. He unfortunately discovered their bodies. He proceeded to leave the house. He went to a friend's house to get help, and then they returned and contacted authorities.
So this was her dad?
Her dad.
Oh, goodness.
That's right.
And he was older?
Yes. He was already in his early 80s. Yep.
Okay.
So when the police arrived, they found DeLacy Fogleman laying somewhere in the vicinity of the kitchen in a pool of blood. And they found his wife, Ethel, in her bed, and both had been shot dead. Because this was just outside the city limits, the Randolph County Sheriff's Department was called in to investigate.
Okay.
And then later, the SBI was called in as well. The Randolph County medical examiner was Marion Griffith, and he was contacted. And he came, and when he examined the bodies, he estimated that the couple had been deceased for about 8 hours.
Okay.
And since they were found around 1:30 to 2 in the afternoon, they, just determined that it had probably happened somewhere in the middle of the night.
Okay.
Early morning hours.
Right before, so this happened on a Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And to just, who can do this to an older couple like that?
I
It's so
know.
sad.
I
Okay.
know. Yeah. So early reports state that there was a broken louver on a back door. The house was ransacked. There was some costume jewelry, like rings and such, on the kitchen table with a $5 bill.
Okay.
And in the bedroom, both victims' wallets were strewn, the contents of those wallets were strewn over the bed.
Robbery.
But, yeah, but no money was in the wallet. That's right.
Okay.
So officers at that point, that's exactly what they naturally speculated, that this
Right.
was a robbery.
Okay.
There was no other obvious motive.
Right.
I mean, this was an upstanding couple in the community. DeLacy worked at the local furniture plant, then called Liberty Chair Company.
Okay.
And Ethel worked at the Shoe Mart in town.
Okay.
And everybody interviewed during that time agreed they were a very well-known, kind, likable couple.
Right.
So I'm going to take a few minutes to describe in more detail the injuries.
Okay.
So DeLacy was found face up on the kitchen floor, and there appeared to have been a struggle with Mr. Fogleman and his attacker. One arm was up as if he appeared to be warding off or trying to block the shots. And so due to that, he had been shot once in the hand.
Oh, wow.
He was also shot 4 times in the head. So a total of 5 shots that he had. The stove was covered in blood. And I found this odd, but the reports said newspapers had been spread across his lower body.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I can't see it. I can't think of a purpose for that.
I wasn't sure what to make of that either. So Ethel, in the bedroom, officers found Ethel in the bed with the covers pulled up around her as if she was asleep when the shooting occurred. She was shot once in her face near her right eye. And like I stated before, both wallets were found on the bed beside of her, empty of money, but with the other contents kind of strewn about.
Okay.
Neighbors that were questioned did not report hearing anything out of the ordinary. But law enforcement did say that if they were shot at close range, that it may have been muffled.
Okay.
And at that time, they felt it was a small caliber gun, but one had not been located. So the officers began working on the assumption that it was possibly a robbery. And they theorized that Mr. Fogleman heard an intruder, went to check on things, and was surprised in the kitchen by the back door, that he struggled with the intruder and was shot. And then that the intruder proceeded through the house, looking for things to take, and shot Mrs. Fogleman in the bedroom.
Okay.
And they said they believed her to still be asleep when she was shot.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. But my question on that was, if she was asleep, if he had already struggled and been shot 5 times.
Yeah. How could she not have heard that?
Right. Wouldn't she have woken up?
Yeah.
So
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, I did question that, but that was just their
Yeah.
theory at the time.
Okay.
So the sheriff of Randolph County at that time was Carl Moore. Initially, he stated that there were no immediate suspects. He did say there had been a hitchhiker in the neighborhood around that time, and they had already questioned him. They had picked him up, questioned him, and released him.
Okay.
Moore also stated that the couple may have known who shot them, but that theory was still being investigated at that time. This was a interview that he had given just within 2 days later.
Okay.
And there's no word on why he was speculating that they knew their attacker.
Right. Hopefully they did not know. their
Right,
attacker.
hopefully. So 4 days later, a double funeral was held for the Foglemans at Macedonia Baptist Church, where they had been noticeably absent that previous Sunday morning.
Wow.
Then on Thursday, April 15th, the Randolph County Sheriff's Department began searching for a murder weapon. The rescue squad used magnets to search the old soapstone mine in the neighboring community of Staley for several hours.
Okay.
When that search did not turn up anything, the next day, which was Friday, scuba divers were called in to also search, but they still found nothing.
Okay.
Now, are you wondering why they were searching that mine?
Yes. Obviously they had some kind of a tip maybe.
That's what I was wondering myself. Well, in the article from the Chatham Record where I found the information about that search in the mine, there was a lot of information and quotes from Sheriff Moore. He outlined a theory that a homemade silencing device may have been used with the weapon to muffle the sound of the killings.
Oh, maybe that's why she didn't hear.
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah. And apparently they had some information regarding one being in the area.
Okay.
And remember also we said none of the neighbors
Right. I was thinking.
heard anything.
Yes.
And those houses are fairly close together there.
Right.
I mean, they're not right up on top of each other.
But you would have heard a gunshot.
Yeah, I think so. Especially 6 total shots.
Yes.
Okay, and I was curious, why were they searching the mine at all?
Right.
Yeah, I was wondering about the possible tip, like you said. So I've talked to some residents in town
Okay.
that were there during the time of, that lived in Liberty during the time of this case.
Okay.
And they shared some town gossip with me. Now, of course, that's only talk, nothing to corroborate this info, okay?
Of course.
But she said it was common knowledge that a neighbor that lived across the street from the mine reported seeing someone throw a weapon there the next day, or sometime maybe the night before or the next day. She wasn't sure.
Possible suspect, maybe?
That's what it sounded like.
Okay.
And so I guess maybe if she had seen that, that neighbor would have contacted authorities.
Sure.
If that was true. All right. However, in the newspaper article, that sheriff is quoted as saying that they had, this is a quote, no specific information that the weapon, which they now believe to be a .32 caliber pistol, was there. That they were searching based on a hunch.
I don't know. That
I know. I found that odd.
likely.
Okay, so that's even more odd than the gossip. The gossip
It
actually
is.
sounds more believable
It does.
than he's working on a hunch.
Definitely.
But we both know that police don't always give up all of their information or their sources when they're working a case. They're protecting it, right?
True.
But I do think there had to have been some specific information given to them more than just
than
a
a
hunch. They're not going to call divers in.
No,
For
they're not
just a
going to waste
hunch.
those resources. In Liberty,
No.
they don't have the resources
Exactly.
to waste like that.
Exactly. The sheriff also did not name a suspect, but he did state again that he believed the killer may have known the family well. So it seems that from the time when the bodies were discovered to about 12 days later when they were searching that mine, that their robbery theory was no longer what they were working from. Their statements now lead you to believe that the murderer possibly, they said, had a key to the house and had tried to make it look like a robbery.
Oh, goodness.
And the sheriff actually said that they had interviewed a likely suspect. He did
Wow.
not say who that was.
Okay.
And then curiously, it's at this point that this case seems to go cold and remains that way for almost 2 years.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, like there's all of a sudden nothing mentioned in the papers anymore. Now, I'm sure the town was still talking,
Sure.
but nothing official. However, I am later going to tell you of a development that actually was going on behind the scenes during that time that really impacted the whole case.
Okay.
But for now, there seems to be no further activity happening. That is until March of 1978. It's at this point that Randolph County officials request that the state of North Carolina post a $5,000 reward for information to help solve the case. According to the Chatham Record, the case was at a dead end. Although the sheriff had a suspect in mind, he just didn't have enough evidence to go to court with it. So nobody had been charged.
Okay.
And I believe those reward funds must have been granted because just 5 months later, the sheriff received what he called new information in the case that did lead to an arrest. And you're going to be surprised when I tell you who that suspect was. The News and Observer, a Raleigh, North Carolina newspaper, reported on August 17th, 1978, that a former JC Club president had been charged with the slayings.
Oh, my goodness.
This was a man who had played Santa Claus in the town's Christmas parade.
Santa Claus,
Yes,
really?
I know. And had recently been named JC of the Year, had received an award for that.
Wow.
He worked in the town's furniture plant the same plant that the deceased.
Oh, so they worked together.
Yep, the same plant that he worked at, DeLacy worked at.
Okay.
And this suspect was also the grandson of the victims.
Oh my goodness. That's terrible.
I know. It is. Joel Dean Stevens, age 22, was charged in the deaths and was being held in the Randolph County Jail. However, shortly after he was charged, he was released on $40,000 bond. Okay, so I also want to note here, Darlene, that although DeLacy Fogleman was Stephen's grandfather, Ethel was actually his step-grandmother. His real grandmother had been killed in a head-on collision just 8 years before this. Okay. His grandfather had remarried Ethel, and this also has a bearing on the facts of the case pertaining to motive that will become evident soon.
I was going to say, why in the world would a grandchild murder their own grandparents?
I know.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there seems to be and it just doesn't make sense.
No, it's almost unimaginable.
Exactly. So his trial was scheduled to begin in June 1979. Joel Stevens pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. The defense attorney at that time, Charles Brown, asked for out-of-county jurors to be chosen because he said, and I quote, "It's highly improbable, if not impossible, that he, Stevens, could get a jury who has not heard the facts of this case laid blatant before them," end quote.
Okay. I mean, I can see that.
Yeah, like I said, the whole town knew about this.
Right.
And the surrounding towns within the county. The defense also moved for a continuance because of new evidence that had just been brought to their attention by the district attorney, and they needed more time to prepare. Remember when I told you earlier about the case seeming to go cold, but there was a development behind the scenes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that development was that our suspect, Stevens, in November of 1976, just 7 months after the murders, had traveled to the SBI office in Raleigh, where he had taken a polygraph exam and made some statements during an interrogation.
Okay.
Those statements were the new evidence that was presented to the defense, but that continuance for the trial was denied. His trial began in June of 1979. Now, one key witness was SBI agent Steve Davenport, and he testified to statements that Mr. Stevens had made to him during that polygraph test in November in 1976.
Okay.
Agent Davenport testified that the defendant had been fully advised of his constitutional rights and had signed a waiver agreeing to answer questions without the presence of his attorney.
Oh, goodness.
But that will be contested later on.
I figured. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh.
Okay, so another agent, Wesley Layton, had testified that a fingerprint had been found on Ethel's driver's license, which was on the bed beside her body. That fingerprint, he said, had been determined to belong to the defendant.
Oh.
When Agent Davenport, who was questioning him, asked Mr. Stevens why his fingerprint would be found on Ethel's license, Joel answered that someone must have planted it there with a fingerprint glove.
What is a fingerprint glove?
I don't know. I'm going to just quick little side note. I actually Googled that.
Yes.
And I saw that there are gloves that can change your fingerprints. But the earliest I found those actually being made were 2016. So I'm like, was this a man before his time or what?
Seriously. Okay, so he said that somebody planted his fingerprint.
That's what it sounds to me like he's saying. And it almost sounds like something from Mad Magazine.
Yes.
I mean, or maybe watching spy movies back then, and now the technology has just now caught up with that. I don't know.
Right.
I did find that to be a very interesting statement. Stevens also told Davenport that he did not kill his grandparents, and if he did not remember it.
Oh,
No.
He didn't remember it if he did.
Yeah. So make of that what you will.
Yeah. I can tell you what I make of it if you'd like.
Yeah. Lastly, when asked what should happen to whoever did kill them, he replied that it would depend. He didn't think it should mess up the person's life over one mistake.
Oh my gracious.
Yeah.
Okay. So these are his grandparents that he supposedly loves, and we need to be easy on their killer who brutally killed them because we don't want to mess up their lives.
Yeah. Over one mistake. I'm like, I don't know. I wouldn't call that a mistake.
No, I would
se.
not call that a mistake either.
So, okay. So now there's another witness at the trial, an eyewitness.
Oh.
Also, earlier when I told you that new evidence had been uncovered, which had prompted the arrest of Mr. Stevens, well, at that time, the officials did not state what that new evidence was, but it was actually this eyewitness account. Carlene King, age 36, had come forward and told officers that she actually saw the defendant at his grandparents' house the night of the slayings.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Her testimony is that she was walking down Highway 421, and as she passed through the Fogleman's yard, she heard 1 to 3 shots. She thought they were directed at her, so she crouched down and hid like in a ditch. She then said that she saw Joel Stevens at the side of the house and recognized him because she was from this area, had family around that area, and she knew who he was by sight. She described him as short, fat, and balding.
Oh, okay.
Well, that sounds odd to me because remember, he was only age 22 at the time.
Right.
But I have seen...
Oh, yeah. He was 22.
Yeah. But I've seen pictures of him. Actually, I want you to look at this picture.
Okay.
Okay. This was taken of him sometime between the ages of 22 and 25.
Okay. Well, you know what? That was a pretty accurate description.
I know, right?
He does not look 20. Did you say he was 22?
22 when the murders took place.
He does not look like a 22-year-old.
Yeah. And he may have been 25 by the time this picture was taken, but still.
He doesn't look like a 25-year-old. No. He looks like she said.
Yeah. We'll post the picture on the website.
Okay.
So she claimed that there was an outside light burning, and it was a clear night, so she was able to see him and recognize it as him. Right. She then heard 2 to 4 more shots. She asserts that she did not come forward then because she was afraid for her family, so she told nobody what she saw. And then she says in July of 1978, she saw a picture of him in the paper receiving that JC of the Year award. And so she did not like the idea of him receiving that award with the information that she said she knew. So she decided to come forward.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Well, let me remind you that in March of 78, there was that $5,000 reward that had been offered for the information.
Yes, there was.
She came forward 4 months after that, in July of 78.
Did she get the reward?
She did. He was arrested right after she reported what she had seen or said she saw. So I'm assuming that's what prompted his arrest. Okay, so yes, she did get the reward. Because of this, Stephen's defense attorneys attacked her credibility on the stand.
Yeah, I would have done the same.
Yeah, she had been paid $5,000 for her testimony. And I do feel like that cast doubt on her eyewitness account. I mean, you know, she didn't come forward until after that reward was offered. It doesn't mean that what she said wasn't true, but any good defense attorney is going to question her motive.
Definitely.
And it, casts some doubt.
And how likely is that if you hear, all these shots and you're passing by there, and then we know Liberty, it's a small town.
Yep.
So it's not like she would not have heard about this.
Right.
And she didn't come forward until there was a reward. I would have absolutely attacked her credibility as well.
Yeah. I mean, if my defense attorney did not, I would have fired him.
Definitely.
Okay. But nonetheless, Joel Stevens was found guilty on both accounts and sentenced to 2 life sentences for the crime.
Thank goodness. I believe he did it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, so far. Yeah.
Yep. And now he didn't qualify for the death penalty because during that time, North Carolina did not observe the death penalty. So he got the 2 life sentences.
Okay.
The News and Observer described him as not showing any emotion when sentenced, but wrote that his mother burst into tears as he was led from the courtroom.
Oh, that's always sad.
Yeah. Yeah, he was an only child.
Oh,
I
my
mean, you know,
goodness.
can
I
imagine?
bet he was spoiled.
Probably
By her and his grandparents.
and the grandparents. I'm actually going to share some information with you a little bit later that might confirm your beliefs about that.
Okay.
Of course, his lawyers did appeal that decision. So,
Right.
Yep. So this went
Definitely.
straight to I don't know if it went straight to, but it did end up going to the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Okay.
Okay. So this is what the appeal was based on. The following facts. When he had gone to the SBI office to take the polygraph test in November of 76, the defendant was read his rights, stating that he was not required to take the polygraph, that he could remain silent, and that he had a right to have his lawyer present. He willingly signed a statement acknowledging that, and he was not in custody at that time.
Okay.
But what happened was the test was delivered in 2 parts. The testing phase, which is not an interrogation.
All right.
That's the time at which the person answers the questions that give the test validity. At the conclusion of the test, if that test indicated that the person was lying, then an interrogation starts. So
Okay.
while the testing is going on, the attorney cannot be in the room with him, but he can be in the room once the interrogation starts. Okay. So in this instance, the defendant was tested, and then they started the interrogation right after that. It like that transition just took place all at one time.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
Agent Davenport didn't leave the room. Nor did any officers advise Stephen's attorney that the interrogation was beginning.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So since he had already been read his rights and he didn't demand that, okay, I want my attorney now, they continued with the interrogation, and they said essentially that indicated that he was waiving his right to counsel.
Sure.
Yeah. However, the Supreme Court concluded that since the attorney was not advised that the interrogation had begun and therefore was not present in the room, that he and his client were, quote, misled by a procedure which effectively breached rather than safeguarded the right to counsel and the privilege against self-incrimination. Essentially, the defendant was advised of his rights and then prevented from asserting them, end quote.
Oh, okay.
So that made some of the incriminating statements that he had made and that had,
Inadmissible?
they had been submitted in the first trial and now they were not admissible.
Okay.
So therefore, in a decision handed down from the North Carolina Supreme Court on June 3rd, 1980, he was granted a new trial.
Okay. I don't like where this is going.
Okay, so Joel Stevens' second trial began just 6 months later. Again, Randolph County Superior Court. In this trial, he testified that he had a good, close relationship with his grandfather, DeLacy, and that, in fact, his grandfather had been very generous to him, helping him purchase 2 cars.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he had bought him a new 1973 Pontiac Grand Prix a few years before that. Yeah, I'll post a picture of that on the website, too. It's a pretty nice-looking car.
Yeah, I wish my grandpa would.
Yeah. When asked about his fingerprint on Ethel's driver's license, this time in court, he testified that she had offered to let him use her license because his own license was going to be revoked.
Well, okay. Okay. There are different pictures.
I know. I was hoping you would ask me about that because there's no explanation further than that.
And he lied. So he lied in the previous trial.
Yes.
Or was it in the trial?
Well, it was in statement. It was in statements that he had made to that SBI agent that
Gotcha.
now were not admissible in court. So that didn't come out in the second trial.
So the jury would have had no way of knowing that.
No, they didn't know that.
Okay.
But what kind of sense does it even make? I mean, you don't borrow someone else's license.
No.
That's not going to fly.
Especially your grandma's.
I know.
I mean,
Yeah, and her license,
like your twin brother or something.
and her license was already expired too, so
Oh, my
still not
goodness.
going to help him. So that go figure. Anyway, so the prosecution argued that his motive was that his grandfather was planning to put his property in a joint account with the new Mrs. Fogleman, and that the defendant felt his inheritance was in jeopardy.
Oh.
Even that maybe they were cutting him off financially already, according to what some people had already said.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. But on the stand, Mr. Stevens denied knowing anything about those plans. And he resolutely denied killing them when questioned. Okay. Also during this trial, we find out more about that supposed silencer that was being speculated about by the sheriff during the time when the murders took place. The defendant was shown a lawnmower muffler that had been turned into a silencer for a handgun.
Ah.
He testified that it belonged to a friend, Billy Hardin, who was actually one of his alibis for the night in question.
Interesting. Hmm?
Okay, well, 2 friends actually testified that this is exactly what they did that night. They said that they were with Joel on that night at a disco club in Greensboro. Stevens testified that he had worked that day. He was tired. At the club, he had been drinking some vodka, and so he had gone to the car to sleep until his friends were ready to leave the club.
Okay.
He had an alibi for that night. He denied having had possession of or using the homemade silencer. He denied being at his grandparents' house at all. And although he owned a .32 caliber handgun, he denied throwing it into that old soapstone mine after the murders.
Did he ever produce that handgun after the fact?
I don't know. That murder weapon was never found, and I couldn't find anything that said if they had asked to see those guns.
Right. I'm sure they did.
So, but I found nothing. I did search for that a little bit.
Okay.
After 8 days of testimony, the second trial ended in a mistrial with a solid 6-6 deadlock.
Really?
Yes. So he was convicted the first trial. Second trial is a mistrial.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Garland Yates, the incoming district attorney, wanted to bring him to trial again quickly because of the possibility that he would be released on bond. So
Sure.
so they set that third trial date just 6 weeks later for February 2nd of 1981. But they must have continued that at some point because it didn't actually start. That trial didn't start until June of 81.
Okay.
Okay, so if you recall, when the bodies had been found, police speculated that DeLacy had had suspected an intruder, went to inspect, struggled with the intruder, and then was shot.
Right.
And then they thought the intruder went into the bedroom and killed Ethel while she slept, which I found hard to believe that she had slept through that. Well, during this trial, the prosecution argued that Stevens had killed his step-grandmother first, fearing loss of the financial help and the inheritance.
Okay.
And then when his grandfather discovered what he had done, then he killed the grandfather too.
Oh, that actually makes a lot more sense.
A lot more sense.
Probably grandma wasn't too fond of babying him.
Right. And
Like he was accustomed to.
Yes. Like he even testified himself how generous his grandpa had been with him.
Yes.
And so like you kind of were wondering, was he a little bit spoiled? And it sounds like it. And yeah, I will say people that I have spoken to in the town have said as much to me.
Okay. And grandma probably was like, enough is enough. Like cut the apron strings.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, so this time they had success in getting the trial moved into a neighboring county, which was Montgomery County Superior Court. And after only 3 hours of deliberations, the jury came back with an innocent verdict.
Oh, my goodness.
After 3 trials within a 5-year period, and he had spent 18 months of that time in jail or in prison. I guess it would have been jail if he was waiting for a trial.
Okay.
The defendant was obviously happy when the verdict was read. As he left the courtroom, he said, "I'm glad it's over. I hope they find whoever did it."
Oh, my goodness.
And his mother was obviously in tears again, but this time happy and relieved
Happy
tears.
Yeah.
But Ethel Fogleman's siblings, who had been in the courtroom, were disappointed with the verdict, and they left the courtroom quickly, according to the Charlotte Observer.
So this was his grandfather's siblings.
His step-grandmother's
His step-grandmother's
siblings.
Okay.
Yeah, Ethel's siblings.
Gotcha.
They actually had hired a private prosecutor to work alongside the prosecutors to help with that case, too.
Wow. So they were invested.
Yes.
I mean, of course they were invested,
Yes.
but they were actually invested.
Right. And they really wanted to see justice take place.
Yes.
Well, we're never going to know for sure who took the lives of DeLacy and Ethel Fogleman. I'm sure you have an opinion about it at this point in the story, as most residents of Liberty did have an opinion, a strong opinion. And I can assure you that those closest to the case on both sides have their solid beliefs of who they think did or did not do it.
Right.
It's unfortunate that we don't know if justice was served. Was justice served by letting an innocent man go free?
Right.
Or was justice denied by letting a guilty man go free?
Right.
We don't know for sure. We do know, you and I know, that justice will be served eventually, even if it's
Absolutely.
not in this life, then in the next.
That is facts.
Yep. Well, Joel Stevens took the knowledge of either his guilt or his innocence to his grave when he died in March of 2001 at the age of 45.
So he didn't live very long.
And he still lived in Liberty at that time, or that was what his address was still listed as Liberty.
Okay. Right. We all like that quick kind of gratification, and we want to know who the villain is. But, sometimes we just have to wait. If you enjoyed today's episode,
And even if you didn't,
we're shamelessly asking you to go to your Apple Podcast app or wherever you listen to your podcast. Give us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Even if it's just one sentence, that helps so much to get our show noticed in a sea of other podcasts. We appreciate every listener more than you know.